On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, a man in a dark suit bought a one-way ticket at Portland International Airport. He paid cash. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. He carried a black briefcase. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He sat in seat 18C, alone, near the rear of the plane. To everyone around him, the flight attendants, the other passengers, he was just another businessman heading home for the holiday. Shortly after takeoff, the man passed a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number. She slipped it into her pocket without reading it. He leaned across the aisle. "Miss," he said quietly, "you'd better look at that note." She opened it. It read, "I have a bomb." What he said next was calm, almost polite. He told her to sit beside him. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to see what was inside. Wires, red cylinders, a battery. Then he closed it again. He had 4 demands: $200,000 in negotiable $20 bills, 4 parachutes, a fuel truck standing by in Seattle, and no tricks. He said if his demands were not met, he would detonate the device. Florence Schaffner walked to the cockpit and told the captain. The captain radioed Seattle. The plane circled Seattle for 2 hours while authorities decided what to do. The FBI was called. The airline was called. The Northwest Orient executives were called. They agreed to pay. $200,000 was assembled in ransom bills, each one photographed, each serial number logged. Agents worked through the afternoon to gather the cash. 4 parachutes were sourced, 2 civilian sport chutes, 2 military-issue reserves. The passengers were told there was a mechanical problem. They sat, unaware, as a hijacking unfolded around them. At 5:24 p.m., the plane landed in Seattle. The passengers were released. The money and parachutes were loaded aboard. And then the plane took off again. Cooper was still on it. Cooper gave the pilots their instructions. They were to fly to Mexico City at the lowest possible altitude, 10,000 feet, at the slowest possible airspeed. Landing gear down, flaps at 15 degrees, the plane flying on the edge of a stall. He demanded the plane fly over a specific heading, south-southwest, into the night. Just before 7:40 p.m., the flight attendants were ordered to the front of the plane and told not to come back. Then, somewhere over the wilderness between Seattle and Reno, the rear air stair of the Boeing 727 was lowered. It was a unique feature of that aircraft, a staircase that could be extended in flight, descending from the tail. And at approximately 8:13 p.m., while the plane flew through darkness and heavy rain at 150 miles per hour, someone used it. A pressure change was recorded in the cockpit. The crew checked the rear. Cooper was gone. The military scrambled. F-106 fighter jets were already shadowing the 727, but in the darkness and the rain, they had seen nothing. No parachute, no figure falling. The jump zone, if it could even be called that, was the Cascade Mountains. Hundreds of miles of dense conifer forest, frozen rivers, steep ravines, and near zero visibility in November. Search teams were deployed at first light. Helicopters swept the ridgelines. Ground crews pushed through old-growth timber. They found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of fabric. Not a dollar bill. Cooper had either landed in one of the most hostile environments on the Pacific coast and survived, or he had not survived at all. Neither answer led anywhere. The FBI opened what would become one of the longest active investigations in the Bureau's history. The FBI had one advantage: witnesses. The flight attendants had sat beside him for hours. They described him carefully. He was between 40 and 50 years old, around 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, dark complexion, dark eyes. His hair was dark brown, worn short. He was clean-shaven. He wore a dark business suit, a white shirt, a black tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He spoke quietly and politely. He smoked cigarettes throughout the flight, Raleigh filter tips. He drank his bourbon without nervousness. One flight attendant later said he seemed almost sad. The FBI produced a composite sketch. They named their suspect Dan Cooper, the alias he'd used on the ticket, but a wire report confused the name, and the press began calling him D.B. Cooper. The name stuck, but the man himself had no name, no history, no face that matched anything in any file. The FBI had photographed every bill. All $200,000 had been recorded by serial number. Anytime a bill from that ransom appeared, in a bank, at a gas station, at a shop, it would be flagged immediately. Agents waited. Months passed. Then years. Not a single bill surfaced in circulation. This was a problem with two possible explanations. Either Cooper had died in the jump, and the money was buried somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, rotting in the earth with him. Or he was alive, and careful enough never to spend a dollar. For years, the bill's silence was the loudest part of the case. Of the 4 parachutes loaded onto the plane, Cooper had used 2. One was the primary chute, one was a reserve. But investigators made a troubling discovery. The reserve parachute Cooper took was not functional. It was a training dummy, a chute that had been sewn shut and was never meant to be used. He had taken it by mistake, which told investigators something important. He was not a professional. A trained paratrooper, a military halo specialist, a skydiving instructor, any of them would have known a dummy chute on sight. He had grabbed it in the dark and jumped anyway. And yet he had pulled it off. Or had he? There was something else. The primary chute Cooper used was a military surplus NB-8 parachute. Serviceable, but not the kind of equipment a professional would choose for a night jump in a rainstorm over mountain terrain. The jump he made, at night, in rain, at low altitude, through the Cascades, was one that most trained skydivers would have called suicidal. In February of 1980, 8 years after the hijacking, a boy named Brian Ingram was on a camping trip with his family along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was digging in the sandy riverbank when his fingers found something. It was a bundle of decayed bills. He pulled out another, then another. In total, he found 290 bills, partially decomposed, clumped together, their edges rotted. The serial numbers were still legible. They matched the Cooper ransom. Investigators were stunned, not by the find itself, but by what it implied. The bills had not been spent. They had been lost, or discarded, or buried, and the river had moved them over 8 years. The Columbia River drains a vast interior territory, and the bills could have entered the water anywhere along hundreds of miles of tributaries. The find confirmed the money existed in the Pacific Northwest. It confirmed it had never been laundered. It confirmed nothing else. Over the decades, the FBI investigated more than 1,000 suspects. There was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a man who hijacked a different plane in 1972 using an almost identical method, parachuting with $500,000 in ransom. He was caught. He was imprisoned. He escaped and was killed by federal agents. Many believed he was Cooper. The FBI ruled him out. The physical description did not match closely enough. There was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Orient baggage handler, identified years later by his own brother as the hijacker. Investigators looked. They found no conclusive evidence. There was L.D. Cooper, identified by a niece who said her uncle had confessed to her years before his death. Again, no evidence strong enough to close the case. And there were hundreds of others: deathbed confessions, anonymous letters, coded messages claiming to reveal the truth. None held. The FBI formally suspended active investigation in 2016. After 45 years, after 10,000 interviews, after 1,342 named suspects, the case remained open. The flight crew had logged every detail they could. The rear air stair had been lowered. The pressure change had been recorded. The time was approximately 8:13 p.m. Based on the plane's heading, speed, and position at that moment, the FBI calculated a probable jump zone, a corridor of roughly 25 miles wide running southeast of the town of Ariel, Washington. But this calculation was disputed. A later analysis suggested the pilots may have flown off course. The jump zone could have shifted significantly south. Other researchers placed the landing zone nearer to the Columbia River, which would explain the Tina Bar bills. No one agreed on exactly where Cooper had come down. This was the central tragedy of the physical investigation. Everything pointed somewhere. Nothing pointed precisely anywhere. Cooper had left something behind on the plane, his clip-on tie. For years it sat in an evidence bag, a black clip-on tie with a mother-of-pearl clasp, unremarkable on its surface. But in 2011, a private investigation team subjected it to advanced forensic analysis. What they found was extraordinary. The tie contained particles that, at the time of the hijacking in 1971, were exclusively associated with a single industrial manufacturing process. the production of titanium alloys and certain aerospace components. These particles, rare earth elements and titanium residue, were not consistent with civilian manufacturing of any kind in 1971. They suggested that whoever had worn this tie had worked, at some point, in advanced aerospace or defense industry. The FBI acknowledged the findings, but did not alter their conclusions. The tie remains in evidence. The question everyone asks, could he have survived? The FBI's official position after decades of investigation was that the jump was almost certainly fatal. The conditions were against him. It was night. It was raining hard. The temperature at jump altitude was below freezing. He wore a business suit with no thermal protection. He carried no survival equipment. He had no knowledge of the precise terrain below him. The Cascades in November are not forgiving. And yet, experienced wilderness survival analysts pointed out that the lower Columbia River plain, if that was his actual landing zone, is relatively flat and forested, not cliff and ravine country. A man who hit the trees at low speed and survived the impact could theoretically have walked out. The money found at Tina Bar was never conclusively explained. It may have been washed from a crash site, or it may have been discarded by a man who no longer needed it. Both answers are possible. Neither has ever been proven. Dan Cooper, not D.B. Cooper. That was the press. Dan Cooper was the name on the ticket, a name he had chosen, a name that led nowhere. In 1971, a popular Belgian comic book character was named Dan Cooper, a Royal Canadian Air Force pilot who, in one storyline, parachuted from a plane. Some researchers believe the name was deliberate, a private joke, a man who knew the reference. Others thought it meaningless, a common enough alias in an era before photo identification was required to purchase a domestic airline ticket. What the name tells us is this: whoever Dan Cooper was, he had thought about the name. He had chosen it carefully or carelessly, and either way, it was the last true thing he ever gave the world, a name that was not his. In July of 2016, the FBI officially suspended active investigation into the case it called Norjack, Northwest Hijacking. The file remains open. New evidence can still be submitted. No one has been ruled out as a final suspect. In the years since, private researchers, forensic analysts, retired federal agents, and amateur investigators have continued the work. A group called the Citizen Sleuths has conducted advanced DNA analysis of the tie's organic material. They claim to have identified DNA consistent with a specific male profile, but without a suspect to match it to, the profile sits in a database, waiting. In 2020, a woman named Lisa Story filed a claim with the FBI, asserting that her late father, Walter R. Recca, had confessed to her in detail that he was D.B. Cooper. The FBI reviewed the claim. They did not close the case. They have never closed the case. Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, the answer to this case may still exist. In the roots of an old-growth cedar, in the silt of the Columbia, in the memory of a family that has kept a secret for more than 50 years. D.B. Cooper did not just hijack a plane, he hijacked a myth. He became the only unsolved air piracy case in American aviation history, and the only figure in that history that much of the public quietly, privately, hoped had gotten away. Not because what he did was right, but because something about the image of a man in a dark suit, stepping off the edge of a plane into a dark and rainy sky, carrying $200,000 he may never have spent, something about that refuses to feel finished. The FBI has his tie. They have his fingerprints, partial, degraded. They have his DNA profile, with no match. They do not have him. If you believe you know who D.B. Cooper was, or who he is, the FBI case remains open. Every theory we have on this channel will be in the comments below. And if you've stayed this far, the next story is already waiting.